These steps were terribly awkward coming down. One had to step them one by one, and reminded me of the old lady who was walking with one foot on the curb and one foot in the road. And they said to her, "Why are you walking like that?" She said, "Oh, I thought I was lame."
This is obviously going to be my absolute downfall, this interview. So I approach you really as the depressed area's David Frost, Mr. Hitchcock. I don't want to ask you any of the questions I'm sure have bored you over the years. Well, I'd try and avoid them anyway. What interests me, to start the ball rolling, I'm fascinated by writers' diaries, by writers' notebooks, and therefore, as a fellow director, I'm fascinated at the point where you feel yourself committed. Is it in the script? Is it the first day? Is it long before the script? Where do you think it all starts for you?
Well, for me, it all starts with the basic material first. Now, the question, when you have, we'll say, basic material, you may have a novel, you may have a play, you can have an original idea, you can have just a couple of sentences, and from that the film begins. Now, I work very closely with the writer and begin to construct the film on paper. From the very beginning, we say, well, when we roughly sketch in the whole shape of the film, and then begin from the beginning. And you end up with, say, 100 pages, or maybe even more, of narrative, which is very bad reading for a litterateur. I mean, there are no descriptions of any kind. No, for example, he wondered, because you can't photograph he wondered.
And no camera pans right or any of that?
Not at that
garbage,
stage,
no.
not at that stage, no. It's as though you were looking at the film on the screen and the sound was turned off. And therefore, to me, this is the first stage. Now, the reason for it is this. It is to urge one, to drive one, to make one work purely in the visual, and not rely upon words at all. Because I'm still a purist, and I do believe that film, being the newest art of the 20th century, is a series of images projected on a screen, and this succession of images create ideas, which in their turn create emotion, just as much as in literature, words put together create sentences, and so on and so forth.
Do you think at that stage, do you think in black and white, or is your preference for colour? I mean, do you find yourself thinking in terms of black and white images?
Not at all, no. The colour is part of the structure. In other words, you restrain colour, bring it in when it's necessary, but don't orchestrate it so loudly that later on you may use it in a word, to mix metaphors a moment, you've exploded your gunpowder.
Yes, I mean, there was something behind that question, because if I may be so bold, I thought there was only one of your films which leaps to mind, which I thought would have been better in black and white, and that was The Birds. I don't know why, this is only a personal preference. I would have preferred to have seen that film in black and white. I wondered why you opted for colour.
Strange enough you should ask that. I opted for colour because The Birds were black and white.
Yes.
So that the faces of the people involved would be separated from the birds.
Yes, my question was really more technical, because I felt the technique of the birds, the phony birds, would have perhaps been less obvious to me if they'd have been in black and white. That was the only thing that I...
Well, we actually used real birds. There were no mechanical birds used at all.
Well, there were one or two wooden ones or stationary ones, weren't there?
We hoped that it deceived the eye. But that was purely a matter of quantity rather than quality.
When you say you start with a script, how many, I know in my own case, the amount of, as it were, stillborn children one has. How many times do you think in your career have you started off with what hopefully you thought was something that was going to excite you and alas have had to abandon it?
Oh, many times. In the last 2 years I've abandoned 2 projects. And the point is you get so far and you realize it's not going to work out. So it's better to lose $150,000 or $200,000 than $2 million.
Yes.
So just dump it and let it go.
I've often found myself, and perhaps you have had the same experience, that although we dump things, certain things, part of the egg remains and continues to gestate, and we pull them out of a drawer, out of our subconscious in years later and use them again in a different context. Does that happen to you?
No, it doesn't happen to me. The only thing that I pigeonhole are certain ideas that belong to a certain genre picture. The adventure film, for example. You store up an idea and you put it away, and one day it will come out. For example, in a picture like North by Northwest, I've waited about 15 years to put Mount Rushmore on the screen.
Yes.
So you keep it back in your mind. Unfortunately, it doesn't always work out, because storing this thing up and having the pleasure of anticipating the use of it, the Department of Interior step in. And they say, you mustn't have any character climbing over the faces of the presidents. And you say, why not? They say, oh, because this is the shrine of democracy. You must only have your characters sliding or chasing between the heads. And I was completely defeated, because I had a lovely idea, which I thought, of Cary Grant sliding down Lincoln's nose and then hiding in the nostril of it.
It's a Kleenex ad.
And the man in search of him is in the vicinity, but unfortunately Cary Grant, hiding in the nostril, begins to have a sneezing fit.
Marvelous.
And I was never allowed to do it.
Well, shall we invite some questions from the audience on what we've discussed so far? That one.
I wondered, had you ever been tempted to step outside the sort of thriller limitation and do something completely different? Or is it the attraction, is the limitation the attraction to do something new?
Well, no, it's not for me. It's the public, you see. If I made, for example, a musical, the public would wonder, when will the moment come when one of the chorus girls will drop dead? And what from?
Gentleman at the back, nearly next to the lady in green. Yes, you, sir.
Apart from self-satisfaction, Mr. Hitchcock, what is your basic motive for making the films that you do make?
Basic motive? Money. There's an old expression which says, all work and no play makes Jack.
Yes. Mr.
Mr. Hitchcock, you said that you have in your mental bottom drawer, if you like, a series of bizarre or locations or backdrops. Which one would you most like to use in your films and haven't had yet the opportunity to do so?
Well, I once had an idea that I would like to open a film, say at the Covent Garden Opera or the Metropolitan or the Scala in Milan, and Maria Callas is on the stage singing an aria, and her head is tilted upwards, and she sees in a box way up a man approach the back of another man and stab him. She is just reaching a high note, and the high note turns to a scream, and it's the highest note she's ever sung in her life. The result of which she gets a huge round of applause. I don't know the rest.
Make that one for me. I'll buy that. Just up here. Yes. No, the lady, please. Sorry.
Mr. Hitchcock, I wanted to know, as I was scared stiff by Psycho, what frightens you?
Policemen frighten me. No, the
Not English policemen, surely.
oh, the worst. Because they're so polite.
Mr. Hitchcock, you seem to have a very nice sense of humour, which you obviously had before you established yourself as a thriller and directing thrillers. How come you've never had any comedies?
But every film I make is a comedy.
Mr. Hitchcock, could you tell us when you first had the idea of appearing in all your films? I think it started with The Lodger, and could you tell us why? Because I don't know of any other filmmaker that does it.
No, in those early days we ran out of actors. That's really true.